Matvey Sakharshenko is a Russian actor. Matvey was born on November 16, 2014, and he was a fully normal and healthy baby at the time of his birth. He was born in a hospital in Tula, Russia, a city located approximately 2 hours south of the capital Moscow. And, at least at first glance, he appeared to be doing well. His physicians, however, noted that he had developed a slight case of jaundice after a couple of days of being sick. Jaundice is characterized by the yellowing of the skin and the appearance of white around the eyes, and it is caused by elevated levels of the liver enzyme bilirubin in the blood. A typical occurrence among infants is jaundice, which is normally not a cause for concern. It is not life-threatening and can be treated quickly and effectively. Nevertheless, if left untreated, it might result in deafness or brain damage. As a result, Matvey was prescribed a unique type of light therapy known as phototherapy, in which he would be exposed to natural light through special lamps in order to treat his ailment and improve his quality of life. Because of the light rays, his bilirubin level would be reduced in his system, and he would be cured of his jaundice. In order to obtain treatment, Matvey had to be admitted to the hospital for a couple of days, and his mother left him in the care of the medical personnel at that time. Matvey would be placed in a special cot and stripped down to his underwear in order to expose as much skin as possible to the sun's rays. His eyes, on the other hand, would be covered to protect them from the harsh lighting. He would only have to be in the crib for brief amounts of time, and he would constantly have to be closely monitored to ensure that nothing went wrong. However, the nurse in charge of his care had to take a break for a brief period of time. Then she walked out of the room to deal with something else. Matvey was in his crib when she returned. This was the only thing she was not meant to do, and it was at this very moment that calamity struck. It was not the light therapy that went awry, but rather the failure of judgment that resulted in the treatment. Matvey must have been the unluckiest infant on the face of the planet at that moment, since just at the moment the nurse left him for a few moments, one of the lamps shattered, exploded, and erupted into flames, causing him to lose consciousness. Matvey, a 3-day-old baby who had no idea what was going on and couldn't see a thing, was being horribly burned. It was a horrible scene. The nurse returned a little while later, and she immediately saw that something was seriously wrong with the patient. The little crib she had left Matvey in was on fire, and she screamed and sobbed her way to the safety of a nearby building. The fact that this had occurred on her watch was horrifying and devastating. Nevertheless, she was fortunate in that she was able to react quickly because, despite her distress, she attempted to put out the flames by putting a diaper on the exploding and burning lamp before attempting to save Matvey. And just when you thought things couldn't get much worse, they did. With the therapy lamp exploding for the second time in as many days, this time it threw bits of the blazing diaper all over Matvey, who was still engulfed in flames, and the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The nurse was completely afraid. Matvey had already been lost to her, and the situation appears hopeless. Help arrived quickly, and they were eventually able to extinguish the flames. Little Matvey was brought to the hospital and treated for terrible burns all over his body when he was discovered. Doctors determined that at least 75% of his body had been burned during the incident, which is both horrifying and potentially deadly for such a small child. Even a minor infection could have resulted in his death, and the agony he must have endured is incomprehensible to the majority of people. His little fingers and toes had been partially burned away, and his face was no longer recognizable. Additionally, his internal organs had been severely damaged as a result of the fire. But even then, Matvey's fate was not finished with him, because when his 19-year-old mother learned of the tragedy and realized the extent of the damage done to her small son, she did not immediately jump to mama bear mode and pray for his life as she might have. No, she came to the conclusion that she was unable to cope with the circumstances and bear the responsibility of such a severely burned and now crippled child, and she decided to abandon him. In any case, it was clearly evident that Matvey would never be able to fully heal from his injuries and would require numerous rigorous and expensive therapies throughout his life to deal with the consequences of the fire. And he was now on his own to deal with the consequences of his actions. As an orphan, his future is as uncertain as it can be, even if he is only a few days old. Matvey's tragic and agonizing story was quickly picked up by the media, and it stunned the entire country. When the disaster occurred, an investigation was launched. And soon after, one of the hospital's directors, Galina Sakdeva, was found guilty of carelessness and sentenced to 3.5 months in prison, which was deemed too little too late. After reading about Matvey in the newspaper, many individuals expressed sympathy for the child, and some even volunteered to assist with either medical care, materials, or just financial contributions. A large number of ladies also attended, indicating an interest in adopting Matvey. He had become a celebrity baby by this point, and even his mother returned to claim her child. However, because she had already relinquished her parental rights to him, the situation was no longer as clear. And to be completely honest, the court did not get the impression that she just regretted her decision to give him up because she was in love with him. However, it is possible that she believed she could benefit from by his now superstar position in Russia. One woman who came forward to adopt Matvey, on the other hand, stood out, or at the very least attempted not to stand out by staying out of the spotlight and away from the media. Her name was Svetlana, and the judge had the impression that she might be the most qualified and honest candidate for Matvey's position. We were all anxious to get through the procedure and wait for all of the paperwork, but it was Svetlana who received the final approval to bring Matvey home, and he would now refer to her as his mother from this point forward. It was because Svetlana was aware that a large number of people were worried about Matvey and wanted to know how he was doing. She promised to assist with the creation of a blog to keep everyone up to date on his progress. It was maintained entirely by volunteers, and it issued updates on Matvey on a regular basis. As Svetlana explained to them, the operations that were planned for Matvey included skin grafts to repair the skin on his hands and legs and attempts to give him some resemblance of a nose again. His own nose had been entirely burned, and he was now forced to wear a prosthesis in order to be able to properly breathe. He would also need to grow more muscle and weight in general, as well as keep his physique well nourished and his skin as smooth and supple as possible. He had numerous scars that required special lotions to be applied to them. In addition, he required medication for the discomfort. Several critical physiological tissues had been lost, including those required for the most fundamental actions, such as sitting, gripping, and turning. He required training and therapy to restore these tissues. He was spending a lot of time in the hospital, but Svetlana was able to take him out for walks and introduce him to the outside world while he was there. The blog also informed everyone about how Matvey, in opposition to others, perhaps against all chances, he was growing up to be a gorgeous, cheery, and happy young man. Svetlana said that he had a constant smile on his face, and everybody who came in contact with him couldn't help but feel better about themselves. It was almost as if Matvey was emitting small beams of sunshine from his body. They had an impact on everyone who came in contact with him. I couldn't understand how he could be so upbeat and optimistic when everything seemed to be conspiring against him, and he was in constant pain and discomfort. It was difficult for anyone around Matvey to comprehend how he might ever return to a normal life after his ordeal. Matvey, on the other hand, simply accepted everything as it was presented to him. It never ceases to amaze me how those who have faced a slew of difficulties and disappointments have managed to have such a positive outlook on life. The fact that Matvey didn't know any better could perhaps have contributed to his perception of himself as simply another ordinary small child. He was growing up quickly, and he was beginning to learn to walk and talk, as well as to catch up with his newly adopted brothers in terms of development. Due to the severe burns on his legs and the fact that he was missing a number of toes, walking became difficult for him. They explored for treatments in other countries that might be able to help, but so far they have been unsuccessful. It is apparent that this small guy has a long way to go in his development. Moreover, you're curious as to how he would look back on everything when he's older. One day, he'll learn the truth about his life and the awful accident that he endured, and he will likely reflect on how different his life would have been if the nurse had simply remained in the room with him and kept an eye on him during those vital minutes when the lamp exploded. Possibly, if she had been able to pull him away promptly, he would have only had suffered minor injuries rather than being terribly wounded and disfigured for the rest of his life. However, there's no point in speculating about what might have happened. The course of life is what it is, and certain things, no matter how much we wish could turn back the clock, there may be some events or decisions that have occurred in your life that you wish you could go back in time or change. Or are you more like Matvey, who simply accepts life as it comes while striving to be appreciative and smile at least once a day? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this and in the comments section.